In episode 5, Lainey and Josie head to their aunt's storage facility, and Lainey is trying to convince Josie that maybe she should stay in San Francisco for the time being. Josie then gets a phone call, and it's from home, and when she pulls the phone out, she drops it on the floor, and Lainey sees that it's home. She also sees the background of her, a guy, and his kid. So, for whatever reason, Lainey decides that it's acceptable for her to pick up the phone and answer it, and Josie snatches it out of her hand and turns around to take the phone call. Once again adopting the British accent, but telling her fiancé, "I'll call you back later." When Josie gets off the phone, she turns to Lainey and questions why she would do that. And Lainey tells her it's because she doesn't feel connected to her at all. Josie doesn't respond, though, just opening up the storage facility. And they realize that the storage facility is packed with their own belongings from their childhood that their aunt kept. So they start going through some of the items, and Lainey says to Josie, "I like the name Vivian because she overheard on the phone her fiancé call her Vivian." She also says that the British accent kind of threw her off a bit. She's trying to bait Josie into telling her more about her life, but she doesn't. Josie continues to look around the storage facility, pulling down a blanket, revealing a painting of both girls. And when she sees it, she's shook, to the point where she turns to Lainey and says, "Yeah, I'll meet you in the car." The next day, in the hotel lobby, her mom comes to visit her. And Josie doesn't want to talk to Aaron, but Aaron gives her the whole guilt trip of, "Hey, my sister just died. Why don't you give me some time?" There's clearly an awkwardness, though, and finally Aaron breaks it up by saying that Lainey had mentioned the painting, and since she can't have both of her girls back, she wants that, because it turns out she's the one who painted it. And Josie says, "Yeah, that's fine, but you better go quick, because I paid the guy at the storage facility $100 to clear it out." So Aaron races over there, and lucky for her, all the items are still in there. And it should be a pretty quick trip, but it's not, because Aaron is searching for something in that storage facility, and it is not the painting. She never even finds what she's looking for, and she leaves the painting in the storage facility. And Erin spent a good amount of time in that storage facility looking for whatever it is she wanted to find. Now, Josie's days in San Francisco are numbered, and Lainey knows that. She heads to her hotel room that night, asking her one more time if she would stay, but Josie says, "No, I'm not going to." Lainey apologizes for what she did earlier with the cell phone, and then asks her sister, "Would you stop by before you leave town just to say goodbye to Ella?" And Josie says, "Yeah, of course." She then says goodbye to her sister and leaves, but when she rounds the corner, she pulls out Josie's cell phone that she snatched off the table and tells Siri, "Phone home." Now, over with Poppy, she's gotten her clearance back to go visit Warren because she's been labeled as a private investigator. But during their first meeting, she can tell that something is bothering Warren, although he won't say what it is. So Poppy tells Warren what she's found out about the absence of time between Owen's first call and the next call that he got. And when Warren finds out about this, he reveals to Poppy that Owen had him shanked. Poppy gets really concerned for Warren's safety, telling him, "You need to get witness protection," but he says, "What's the point? Do you know how far his reach goes?" Their time comes to an end, and later in the day, Warren goes to that program where he visits the dogs, but Jack the dog isn't there. And he finds out after Jack attacked the other inmate at the behest of Warren, the dog is labeled at risk and is scheduled to be put down. And Warren gets really upset about this, begging the person to let him talk on the dog's behalf. And they set it up. So in front of two people that I guess make the decisions about the dogs, Warren pleads his case for Jack. He starts off reading some things that he wrote on a cue card, but then he speaks from the heart, telling them that he's doing for Jack what his own father wouldn't do for him. Because in the last 19 years, the only person that really trusted him was Jack the dog. And just because you made a mistake doesn't mean he should die for it. This impassioned plea actually works. Jack the dog's life is spared, and he'll be going back to the shelter until they can find a foster home for him. So Warren did some good. So that's what Warren was up to, but after Poppy left, she went back to her office to meet with Marcus and Noah. And Marcus is kind of pissed off at Poppy because she's been doing these episodes shining a light on Owen Cave being guilty when she doesn't have any evidence. And Poppy can't believe what Marcus is saying because he was right there when they uncovered all the evidence. But being a former cop, Marcus knows what evidence looks like, and even though everything is pointing to Owen Cave, nothing would hold up on court. Marcus tells her, "You don't blow up a person's life unless you know 100% that they're guilty." And that's when Poppy reminds Marcus about all of the evidence against Owen. And Marcus's patience are running thin. He stands up and tells Poppy, "You have no proof." And Poppy screams at him, "Then get me some. That's the whole reason you're here. Get me the proof." And Marcus takes such offense to that he says, "You know what? I'm done. I'm out of here." And he starts to walk out. And Poppy chases after him saying, "Whoa, what's your deal?" And he tells her, "You're hell-bent on burying Owen Cave. I mean, it's pretty clear that this guy pushed some kind of buttons in you. Look, if you want me to keep digging, I'll dig. But, Poppy, we're playing with people's lives here. Are you ready for the consequences of that?" And apparently she is, because Marcus keeps digging. And that night, Poppy and Ingram end up consummating their marriage. So Poppy's in a pretty good mood when she wakes up. She gets her nose to the grindstone, and she starts digging. And she finds something. So she calls up Marcus and actually wakes him up in bed. And what she's found out is that Owen is listed as the founder of this charity called Angel's Halo. and he's the only name on it, which Poppy finds very fishy. She wants to head to the address and find out more information about it, and she wants Marcus to come along. And as she's talking to Marcus, Ingram overhears the conversation. And he's not even really flustered about the fact that Poppy's working with her ex. He wants to talk about Poppy's dad, Shreve. He tells Poppy, I'm going to file a restraining order against Shreve, and she loses it on him, telling him, you don't understand, you're not blood, you don't get a say in this. Ingram can tell, though, that there's something deep down with this, and asks her, is there something that you're not telling me with this situation? I mean, he attacked you. I mean, you know as well as I do, something needs to be done. And Poppy tells him, I know something needs to be done, but I can't do it. And Ingram says, you won't have to. I'll do it. So Ingram heads to the bar and talks to Lillian. And at first, Lillian pushes back about helping Shreve. But the more that Ingram hammers home that Shreve needs help, the more that Lillian finally gives in, admitting that whatever's going on with Shreve, she had just hoped that it would go away, but it never did. She's worried that whatever it is, it'll be something that takes him away from her. So she convinces Shreve to go get an MRI at the behest of Ingram. And Shreve shows up, telling Ingram, I'm not doing this for you, I'm doing it for Lillian. But he also mentions leaving Poppy in foster care, and that is something that Ingram had no idea about. He tries to ask Lillian about it, but she says, you're going to have to ask your wife. And Ingram's wife linked up with Marcus and headed to that charity where they got stonewalled. The guy there wouldn't really give him any information, not telling him about Owen Cave's relationship to the charity or what even the charity went to. But they didn't exactly hit a dead end because Poppy saw the secretary look Marcus up and down, and she tells Marcus, hey, just wait for a lunch break and see if you can find any information because that secretary was very into you. Marcus, though, has to go pick up his daughter, and he picks her up and takes her to a record store, and as they're chatting, he notices somebody walk through the door that doesn't really quite fit the scene, and it's Owen Cave. And as soon as he sees him, he sends his daughter to go wait in the car. Owen Cave then walks up to Marcus and says, tell Poppy to back off, but Marcus tells him, you mess with her family. She's after your head. And at first, Owen tries to appeal to the whole, you're ruining a fellow cop's life, but then he starts to insult Marcus, bringing up the fact that he was kicked off the force for accidentally shooting the wrong person, calling Marcus a drunk. Marcus reminds him, though, hey, that was a good shooting, I got acquitted for it. Owen just looks at him and says, tell Parnell to back off, or it's going to look bad for us all, and then he walks out. But Marcus doesn't heed Owen's advice, though. He meets up with Poppy at her dad's bar and tells her that he found out there is one beneficiary for that charity. Although there's not a name, there's only one letter. It's JJJ. But that's not the only thing he found out. He found out that the charity was set up 1 month after Chuck Berman's death. So the big question is, who is this JJJ person? Because this sounds like hush money. So the next day, Poppy gets on the phone with Warren and tells him about JJJ. Warren is pretty sure he knows who JJJ is. It's a fellow kid in the neighborhood, football star, whose name was John James Jackson. So when she gets this information, Poppy texts Owen, John James Jackson says time's up. And that text could not have arrived at a worse time. Because that morning, as Owen was ready to leave for work, he opened the door and the mayor was there. She didn't want to do it in the office, but she put Owen on leave as they open up an internal investigation based on Poppy's podcast. So he's already in a bad mood. On top of it, his wife seems to be leaving him, at least for the time being. She's taking their son and going to her mom's place. So the world seems to be crumbling in on Owen Cave. So much so that night he actually heads to Melanie's place, starting this woe is me campaign about his life is ruined, but also how he ruined the relationship between him and Melanie. And when Melanie tries to calm him down, Owen kisses her, which she pushes him back, screaming at him, you left us. You took everything from me and Warren. He starts to apologize, but she just kicks him out of the house. So his job and career seem to be in shambles. His wife has left him, and his ex-wife just kicked him out of the house. And with nowhere else to go, he grabs a bottle and heads to Poppy's place, drinking pretty much all of it, and then breaking in and waiting for her to arrive. And when she does, he demands that she record a retraction at gunpoint. And she starts to do it, but it's obvious she's doing it under duress. And eventually she stops, and he screams at her, you ruined my life. Poppy explains that the story is incomplete. If Owen wants to clear his name, they're going to have to sit down and do an interview. She asks him, you're doing all of this because I found out about JJJ? But Owen starts to plead his innocence, telling her that he just jumped out in the middle of the street. He was wearing all black. Owen didn't see him. Owen starts to tell her, I'm a good person. I put that kid in the best facility. I did that. And this is all information that Marcus actually uncovered, but hadn't told Poppy yet. That JJJ was a car accident victim who was left paralyzed in a living facility, where Owen Cave, the only person who donated to the cause, was basically paying for it all. Poppy, however, didn't know this. She just thought that she unearthed who JJJ was. So this is all a revelation of Poppy. And that's when she realizes that's where you were for the 74 minutes. Owen tells her, I didn't call the police because I figured my career would be down the drain. Poppy, though, is shocked and terrified because she's still at gunpoint as Owen Cave continues to tell her how good of a man he is. He also tells her that Warren killed Chuck Berman, and another example of how good of a man he is because he put his own son in prison because he knew that his son was guilty. He then pulls the trigger on himself, committing suicide in front of Poppy. And that isn't the only bad news that she got, because Noah got a tip on their website, and when she went to go follow it up, it was a guy who worked for the city as a street cleaner who on the night of Chuck Berman's murder saw Warren hop the fence with a knife. So it looks like everything that Owen said about Warren was actually right. Thanks for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to this channel. Like the video if you liked it. Hit thumbs down if you don't. Be nice in the comments section. Nasty comments hurt my feelings. I work hard on these. If I make a mistake, it happens. If you don't see the next video up in the end screen, it'll be up soon. Sharing is caring. Put it on your MySpace page or your away message. And check out my podcast, Scene Invaders, wherever you listen to podcasts.